imagine you are translating the absolute most complex rational philosophy in the world.
Right.
You're actively trying to enlighten Victorian society, pushing the boundaries of progressive thought, and in return...
They completely cancel you.
Exactly. That society just cancels you. You become a total social outcast. And, I mean, that is exactly what happened to Marianne Evans.
Yeah, it's a wild story.
So what do you do when the world absolutely refuses to listen to your dense, brilliant treatises just because they don't like your lifestyle?
Get creative.
You adopt a fake name. You pivot to writing fiction about, like, small-town gossip and tea parties, and you just smuggle your hardcore philosophy right into the noses of your readers.
It is brilliant.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today, and we are pulling heavily from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy for this, is to explore the life and mind of George Eliot. We are looking at her not just as, the legendary Victorian novelist you might have been assigned in high school, but as a heavyweight philosopher, someone who really challenged the boundary between art and logic.
And in doing so, she honestly changed how we understand human nature. She is a profoundly important thinker.
Yeah.
She recognized that the cutting-edge intellectual debates of her day they needed a different kind of vehicle.
A different delivery system, right?
Exactly. She took the non-dualist metaphysics of Spinoza, the emotional core of Romanticism, and this brand new emerging science of sociology, and she wove them all into sprawling, best-selling narratives.
It's like she engineered these novels as philosophical Trojan horses. Okay, let's unpack this. To truly grasp how she did that, we have to look at who she was before the pen name.
Right before George Eliot existed.
Born in 1819 into a pretty modest conservative family. She did not have access to a formal university education.
No, not at all.
She was a totally self-taught polymath. I mean, she just casually taught herself French, German, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew.
Just casually, as one does.
Right. And by the 1840s, she wasn't writing stories. She was actually making her name translating some of the most highly controversial German philosophical texts of the era.
Yes, like she translated David Friedrich Strauss's Life of Jesus.
And that was a book that critically examined the historical Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Like stripping away the supernatural element.
Exactly. Highly controversial at the time. And later, she was actually the first person to translate Spinoza's Ethics into English.
Which is massive. And moving to London, she quickly became the de facto editor of the Westminster Review.
Yeah, which was essentially the epicenter of radical progressive thought in England. It was originally founded by Jeremy Bentham.
So here is a woman in Victorian society steering an entire intellectual agenda.
It's incredible.
And just to be impartial here, we were just looking at her specific arguments, but she was advocating for an uncompromising pursuit of truth. She argued that religion was deeply rooted in human nature and human needs, rather than supernatural dictates.
Right. That was her intellectual stance. She was moving in the highest circles with people like John Stuart Mill and Herbert Spencer.
But then her personal life totally collides with that professional standing. She enters into a relationship with George Henry Lewes.
And the scandal wasn't just the relationship itself.
No, it was that Lewes was legally married to someone else.
Yeah.
Even though they were totally estranged.
Right. And in the 1850s, polite society simply could not handle that.
Not at all. She was ostracized.
Yeah.
Essentially exiled from the very intellectual elite she was helping to lead.
Which is such a massive irony.
It reminds me of like an anonymous internet whistleblower today.
Oh, yeah.
Like a modern rogue intellectual who is forced to use an avatar because the public focuses on the messenger instead of the message. The society couldn't handle her truth or her lifestyle.
So she adopts the pen name George Eliot so her work can actually be read.
Right.
What's fascinating here is that this exile, combined with her early work as a translator, provided the absolute foundation for her entire philosophical worldview.
How so?
Well, translating Spinoza's Ethics exposed her to his non-dualist metaphysics.
Okay, let's translate that out of academic speak.
Sure, yeah. So non-dualism is basically the idea that mind and body, thought and feeling, they aren't two separate things living in entirely different realms.
They are intertwined.
Exactly, two sides of the same coin. And that perspective permanently shaped her ideas on determinism, the nature of emotion, and what it actually takes for humans to flourish.
So she took Spinoza's super abstract theories and started asking, like, what do those concepts actually look like in the life of a peasant?
Yeah.
Or a small-town doctor?
Exactly.
Which brings up a really fascinating structural question about her career. How do you go from translating rigid, structured philosophical treatises to writing stories about small-town weavers and farmers.
Well, that's the thing. The shift to fiction wasn't her abandoning philosophy.
Right.
According to Eliot, the fiction was her philosophical method.
Because she harbored this deep disdain for general rules, right, and universal doctrines.
She really did. In her view, algebraic, purely logical language might be, highly effective for mathematics or hard science,
Sure.
but it utterly fails to capture life. Human existence is messy.
Yeah, it's full of ambiguities and contradictions that a mathematical proof simply cannot express.
Exactly. So she believed natural language, and art specifically, is far better equipped to handle the complexities of the human condition.
And the framework she used for this is called realism.
Yes.
But she wasn't talking about realism just in the sense of, like, describing a chair really accurately. She defined it as a humble and faithful study of nature.
Right, focusing on ordinary, flawed people.
Yeah, artisans, peasants, shopkeepers, deliberately shifting the spotlight away from idealized perfect heroes.
She actually compared her writing to giving testimony in a witness box.
Oh, right. But she added that brilliant caveat, didn't she?
Yeah, she admitted she was presenting the world through the defective mirror of her own subjectivity.
Which is a remarkably modern, self-aware stance for the 19th century.
Totally. She is admitting that pure, unvarnished epistemic objectivity is impossible. An artist's perception is always going to be an interpretation, colored by their own thoughts and feelings.
Striving for radical honesty about our own limitations, rather than pretending to have this godlike vantage point.
Exactly.
But wait, if she is supposed to be this strict, objective realist holding up a mirror to the harsh realities of the world, how come her books always feel so warm and forgiving?
It's a great question.
I mean, the world she actually lived in was incredibly judgmental and cast her out, yet the world she created in her novels is so compassionate. Isn't she just creating a fantasy world? So what does this all mean?
Well, that is the exact brilliant contradiction she wrestled with.
Okay.
She was highly aware of what she called her own artistic egoism.
Artistic egoism?
Yeah, the reality that as artists, we ultimately create what pleases us. So while she depicted averagely flawed humans, her narrative voice refashioned the world. Commentators often call it a maternal charity or playful indulgence.
I like that.
She deliberately made her fictional world kinder than the judgmental Victorian society she actually lived in.
Because she believed that modeling sympathetic attention was the highest moral purpose of art.
Precisely.
Okay, so if realism is a mirror that shows us human nature, we need to look at the biggest flaw that mirror reflects.
And according to Eliot, it's our inescapable self-centeredness.
Our ego. The problem of what she called moral stupidity.
Yes, moral stupidity. She describes it as taking the world as an udder meant only to feed our supreme selves.
That is quite the visual.
Right, and we completely fail to realize that other people are the centers of their own worlds.
There is an analogy she uses in her masterpiece, Middlemarch, to explain this, and it's just absolutely brilliant. The pier glass analogy.
It's so famous.
She tells us to imagine a pier glass, which is a large mirror made of polished steel, and over time, it gets minutely scratched in every possible direction by a housemaid rubbing it clean.
Right, the scratches are entirely random, impartial.
Yes, they go everywhere. But if you place a lighted candle up against that scratched metal mirror, suddenly, those random scratches seem to arrange themselves in perfect concentric circles around the flame.
It's an optical illusion.
Exactly. The light falls with this exclusive optical selection. So Eliot says the scratches are the random events of the world, and the candle is the ego of the person looking at it.
The candle produces a flattering illusion that the whole world revolves around its light.
It is the ultimate 19th century description of main character syndrome.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's the exact same phenomenon we see on social media today.
Yeah.
You look at an algorithmic feed, you look at all these random, chaotic global events, and your ego acts like that candle.
Yeah.
It makes you believe the entire world is revolving exclusively around your personal narrative.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Ellie isn't just pointing out a minor character flaw here. She is diagnosing a catastrophic epistemic failure.
Epistemic failure.
Yeah, related to how we acquire knowledge. If you are trapped in that egoism, your actual knowledge of the world is literally defective. You're perceiving a fiction. Her antidote to this illusion is sympathy. And she draws this heavily from the philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach, who she actually translated.
Right. And for Feuerbach and Eliot, sympathy is way more than just, being nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The word literally translates to feeling with.
She believed that knowledge alone, like pure rationality, just isn't enough. We have to integrate thought and feeling.
She even leveled this critique at her good friend, the philosopher Herbert Spencer.
Wait, really? What did she say?
She told him his arguments were flawed because he had an inadequate endowment of emotion.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For Eliot, sympathy is an actual epistemic tool. It's a fundamental mechanism for acquiring true knowledge.
Because if you can't feel with someone else, if you can't imaginatively project yourself out of your own candlelight and into their center of self, you don't truly know them.
Exactly. Without that emotional projection, our data about the world is literally incomplete.
Okay, but if we're all walking around trapped in our own candlelight, how do we actually interact? Like, what determines how we grow and change?
Well, this leads us to her revolutionary understanding of our environment, or what she called the milieu.
The milieu. She borrowed that term from early biology and sociology, right? Via Auguste Comte and Herbert Spencer.
Yeah, it refers to the complex web of relations, both natural and social, that an organism lives within.
Yeah, she took this biological concept and applied it strictly to human life. We are interwoven in this massive, complex social web.
It's sort of like a coral reef. If you remove a fish from the reef, you can't really understand its behavior.
Because the environment is the character.
Precisely. Because of that interwoven web, she argued that character is not cut in marble.
It's living, it's changing. It can become diseased or it can be healed.
Yeah, look at her novel, Silas Marner. Silas starts out completely isolated from his community. He shrinks into this purely mechanical relation to his weaving.
Like a mechanical loom zombie.
Right. He is spiritually and emotionally dead. But he is eventually rehumanized by love and forced connection to his local community.
And this concept of the web allowed Eliot to completely subvert the great man theory of history.
Oh, entirely. That theory was heavily promoted by thinkers like Thomas Carlyle, arguing that history is driven top-down by exceptional individuals, kings, generals.
And Eliot just flipped that. She took obscure, mediocre, seemingly trivial lives, like Dorothea Brooke in Middlemarch, or the incredibly self-absorbed Gwendolyn Harleth, and she put them on a cosmic world history scale.
She argued that the moral grandeur of the world is actually determined by the daily, unhistoric acts of ordinary people embedded in their milieu.
Right.
The small ripples they create in the web shape history just as much as a king does.
Okay, let me ask you this. If we're entirely shaped by our social and biological web, does Eliot think we have free will at all, or are we just trapped? Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, she carves a very careful, nuanced middle path there. She outright rejects strict biological determinism.
Okay.
She leans on the philosopher Leibniz, who proposed that custom and habit act as forces that incline without necessitating.
Incline without necessitating.
Right. Think of your environment and your habits as exerting a massive gravitational pull on your choices. They heavily influence you, but they do not absolutely force your hand.
There is still room for moral effort.
Exactly. You can swim against the current, even if it's really difficult.
And she also illustrates the tragedy of what happens when you lose that web entirely, doesn't she?
Yes, especially in her final novel, Daniel Deronda. She looks at the cosmopolitan modern world and notes that when people lack rootedness in a native spot, they become disconnected from that sustaining web.
It damages their character.
It leaves them morally adrift. You cannot separate the individual from their environment without losing the essence of who they are.
And because human beings are so deeply interwoven in this complex web, Eliot believed it was entirely impossible to use simplistic philosophical formulas to judge their morality.
Exactly.
Which leads to her absolute rejection of utilitarianism.
Oh, she hated it.
Because utilitarianism tries to calculate the greatest good for the greatest number. It's sort of like a heartless corporate algorithm trying to optimize for human happiness.
Right.
You can't just spreadsheet human suffering. Eliot steps in and says, human pain refuses to be settled by equations.
Because emotion is obstinately irrational. It cares for specific individuals, not numerical aggregates.
Right.
You cannot quantify suffering into an algebraic formula, and this led her to launch a massive critique against consequentialism.
The idea that we can judge an action by clearly foreseeing its consequences.
Right. She basically calls consequentialism a myth. Society runs mostly on blind custom or immediate feeling. We almost never act based on a clear vision of distant consequences.
And even if we try, our influence on the world is, as she puts it, incalculably diffusive.
Yes.
You literally cannot know where the ripples of your actions will stop within the web.
This raises an important question. If consequences are incalculable, and everyone is dealing with their own unique web of circumstances, rigid moralism itself becomes an immoral fiction.
Right. Setting hard, absolute lines between the virtuous and the vicious ignores the specialized, messy circumstances of every single individual lot.
And she used this highly empathetic framework to tackle the most heated social issues of her day.
Yeah, without writing a political manifesto. She used the mechanics of her novels to prove her points.
Exactly.
Like, take the woman question. She argued that the severe lack of female education actually backfired directly on men. And again, just to be strictly impartial as we discuss the source material, we're just laying out her critique here.
Right.
But she didn't just state it, she dramatized it.
She really did. She utilized Hegel's master-slave dialectic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is the theory that a person holding absolute power over someone else eventually becomes entirely dependent on the person they subjugate.
The master loses their self-sufficiency.
Exactly, creating this toxic reverse dependency where they are actually powerless. And Eliot took that massive political theory and applied it to a Victorian husband and wife.
In Middlemarch, right, with Rosamund and Lydgate.
Yes. She shows how the shallow, decorative education of Rosamund Vincy doesn't make her a submissive, easy wife for the intellectual Dr. Lydgate.
Because Rosamund is unreasoning and vain, she becomes this formidable, immovable adversary.
Their marriage becomes a mutually destructive trap. Lydgate's supposed dominance is completely undone by the very system that kept his wife uneducated.
And she also aimed her pen at the macro level. She openly opposed the arrogance of the British Empire, writing about the dictatorial contempt the English held toward other cultures.
And in Daniel Deronda, she vocalized a strong opposition to anti-Semitism.
Right. Again, impartially reporting her views, she advocated deeply for a Jewish state. She wasn't just preaching, she was forcing her readers to inhabit the minds of characters vastly different from themselves.
She was using the emotional engagement of fiction to train the moral imagination of her readers.
Which is just incredible. And that really brings us to the legacy of George Eliot.
She trained generations of readers and highly influential thinkers how to perceive the world.
From a socially exiled translator of Spinoza to the progenitor of the modern philosophical novel, she redefined how we view character, ego, and sympathy.
Her exploration of the human psyche was so profound and granular that Sigmund Freud actually read her in the 1870s and 80s specifically to understand how suppressed experience leads to neurosis.
Wait, really? Freud read George Eliot for psychology.
Yes, she was mapping the complex territory of the unconscious long before psychoanalysis even existed as a field.
That is mind-blowing. And you look at the 20th century's greatest writers, her fingerprints are everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. The modernist innovations of Virginia Woolf, the deep internal psychological explorations of Marcel Proust.
They're all direct heirs to George Eliot.
There is one final, really profound historical irony in her legacy, though.
Okay, what is it?
So Friedrich Nietzsche, the famously provocative German philosopher, once openly insulted George Eliot.
Really? What did he say?
He dismissed her as a little moral female who had ditched Christian theology but was pathetically clinging to Christian morals. He really mocked her reliance on sympathy.
Ouch.
Yeah. But the great irony is that Nietzsche's own highly praised naturalistic physiological ethics, his focus on the body and environment, were actually heavily indebted to the very English philosophical tradition that Eliot herself helped to construct and popularize.
Wow. It really makes you wonder, how often do the great thinkers we admire secretly stand on the shoulders of the very people they so casually dismiss?
It's a fascinating thing to consider.
It really is. It's such a great thought to end on. The next time you see a heavy, dusty Victorian novel on a shelf, don't just assume it's some quaint story about tea parties and bonnets.
Definitely not.
It might just be a mirror covered in random scratches waiting for you to bring your own light to it and daring you to look past your own reflection. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you.